They didn't fire me so much as light a fuse and call it innovation. My name is Marcus Vale. I turned 50 last winter, the same week freezing rain lacquered Raleigh's streets like glass. And for 2 decades, I'd been the quiet spine under a company that preferred billboards to bones. At Orion Systems, a gleaming tower of ambition and glass in North Carolina's tech corridor, I was the one who taught the machines to breathe in rhythm. I designed the kernel that moved money, orchestrated the schedulers that balanced millions of transactions without breaking a sweat, and knew by ear when a fan bearing somewhere in cold aisle 3 was a month from failure. My badge said Principal Systems Architect. My calendar said Guardian. I wasn't flashy. I never learned to speak in panels and buzzwords. While other men built little kingdoms of influence over lunch, I walked the humming aisles of our data center with a notepad and a cup of black coffee, listening to the story the racks told in their steady, insect chorus. If I have a talent, it's this. I respect complexity enough not to pretend it's simple. That made me valuable when Orion was hungry and scrappy. It made me invisible to a newer hunger. Her name was Renee Calder, owner's daughter, reputation of being the future in expensive shoes. 28, MBA fresh from a school that sells certainty in sleek brochures. She smiled like the sun in a sales deck and saw our world as a museum exhibit labeled Legacy. She strode into the top-floor conference room that January and announced a modernization initiative, the way a general announces a war. "Marcus," she said on a Tuesday so clear you could see the dust motes in her glass-walled office, "we're going in a new direction." Synthetic eucalyptus scented the air. Her laptop reflected the skyline behind me. She didn't look up when she demoted me to a line on a spreadsheet. "Define new," I said, keeping my tone even. "A machine runs hot when you slam it without warning. People aren't different. Cloud first. AI-driven. Zero trust. You know, the present," she said, like she was naming elements on the periodic table. "Your position is being eliminated. We need fresh perspectives." My throat tasted like pennies, but my voice was calm. "You're replacing the person who understands the foundation with someone who understands the brochure?" She finally glanced up, smile like a blade. "My fiancé, actually. Zane Whitaker. Brilliant mind. Machine learning, predictive ops. He'll bring us where we need to go." I remembered him from the holiday party, the one who kept using the phrase disruptive synergies with the ferocity of a man trying to bludgeon a problem into liking him. He had a way of leaning on tables when he spoke, like everything was a stage. "I'll need all administrator credentials, maintenance schedules, and restoration protocols by Friday," Renee said, already turning back to her messages. "HR has your severance packet." Outside her office, a young marketing associate was photographing the lobby wall where an artist had spelled innovate with bolts. Our reflection looked like we were trapped inside the letters. I nodded, because rage isn't a tool, it's a flare. "You'll have everything." She heard it as compliance. What I meant was literal. For 3 days I lived in the cramped rhythm of last things. I wrote manuals that would make librarians weep, not because they were useless, but because they were precise. I diagrammed the heartbeat of Orion's core, the mesh that moved I/O like choreography, the way our payment engines breathed heavier on the 1st and 15th of every month, the seasonal quirks when humidity messed with static and winter air made the floors spark. I mapped dependencies not as a tree, but as a web, because that's what it is when a single missed update can corner a process and watch it starve. I didn't sabotage anything. I have been a custodian of other people's lives too long to commit vandalism out of spite. But you can't compress 20 years of problem sense into a binder. You can't footnote timing. You can't annotate the feeling you get in your stomach when the logs look normal, but something in the pattern hums wrong. On Friday, Zane met me in the server room for the ceremonial handoff. He wore designer denim that had never met a cable tray and a button-down so crisp it felt like an insult in the cold aisle. "Marcus," he said, glancing at the thick binder like it might stain him, "I've been following developments in predictive maintenance. With AI applied to your telemetry, we can automate the majority of this. Imagine, the system adjusts itself." "It already does," I said. "We taught it when to be cautious." "That's the thing about legacy thinking," he replied with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "It assumes the past has a monopoly on wisdom." I slid the encrypted drive across a steelwork table. Every password, every recovery sequence, every "don't do this on a Thursday at 4 p.m." lives here. The manual expects intelligence, not faith. He made a show of flipping pages. His confidence gleamed like a showroom car. You could see your face in it if you wanted to be flattered. My last day's Monday, I added. I'll do exit briefings with ops and network. After that, you're the man. He gave me a look men give when they think they've won something from you weren't playing for. We'll be fine. That night, when the building emptied and the fluorescent lights hummed like bees with headaches, I walked the aisles one last time. My fingers trailed along the edges of the racks out of habit, counting hums. I stood at the end of row C and wanted a minute of sentimentality, but it didn't come. Machines don't love you back. They only do what you taught them to do. On Monday, I took my framed photo of my daughter holding a wrench in the cold aisle when she was 10 and declared she'd chosen her future, and my ceramic mug that said "Speak kindly to your sysadmin," and the plant that had survived precisely because the data center air was dry and punishing. People hugged me in twos. My friend in network, a woman with eyes so observant you could feel your posture improve under her gaze, squeezed my arm. "Are you sure you're okay?" Nia asked. "He asked me yesterday if DHCP is still a thing." "Everything is still a thing," I said, smiling to keep from showing how much it landed. "But you'll handle it." As I walked to my old Civic in a parking garage full of cars newer than some of our servers, I expected to feel hollow. Instead, I felt the odd, weightless clarity you get when a storm moves out and leaves the sky too blue. I had done everything right. If something broke, the breakage would hold up its own mirror. The first 3 days of not going to work tasted like sleep and the sound of my neighbor's staticky radio through the wall. I updated my resume with the humility of a man who knows bullet points do not contain meaning. I emailed 3 former colleagues I taught to read logs like poetry. I took my dog, Penny, on smug long walks and finally repaired the sagging cabinet door in my kitchen with the same patience I used for systems. Measure twice, adjust quietly. On day 8, my phone lit up at 7:14 p.m. with Nia's name. "Marcus," she said. "No hello, breath the taut string on a violin. You didn't hear this from me, but we've got a problem." Zane pushed a new thermal model into production. "What did he change?" I asked, already feeling the map of our system in my head warming under my fingertips. He reweighted the cooling algorithm based on predicted load to save power. It listened for 15 minutes and decided we run too cold. Half the racks are creeping toward hot. Backup chillers didn't spin up when I kicked them. The automation says they aren't needed yet. "Panel D4, I said, moving to my desk for the printed binder I wasn't supposed to have. "There's a manual override he doesn't know exists because the panel looks like a breaker, not a button. Turn the key, lift the cover, throw the switch, hold for 3 seconds. It bypasses the model and reverts to baseline thresholds." "I can't touch anything without his okay." "Chain of command," she said, and I could hear her roll her eyes hard enough to sting. "There are flavors of dread. The kind that's an elevator dropping. The kind that's a slow filling room. This was the second. Document everything," I said. "Email yourself a copy. If it tips, get out before it dumps hot air in your face." "Copy," she said, and hung up, and I poured bourbon I didn't want and sat on my couch listening to Penny snore and watched the night through my window like I used to watch graphs. Friday arrived like a fire alarm. At 6:41 a.m., my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months. Gideon Calder, founder of Orion, Renee's father, a man who used to walk the floor with donuts and gratitude. His voice sounded like someone else had wrung it out. "Marcus," he said, "please, we need you." "What happened?" I asked, already moving, already pulling my old Orion hoodie from a hook like superstition. "Zane made improvements," he said, spitting the word flat. "And now nothing is." He choked on a breath. "We've got cascading shutdowns. Backup power won't stabilize. Security has locked down the core services because the checksums are tripping. Clients are calling me at home. Regulators showed up. If we don't have a path out by Monday, I don't know if we have a company." For a beat, I did the thing that petty men do. I considered enjoying the sound of panic coming from someone who let his reckless child steer a freighter. Then I remembered the names on the paychecks that came out of that freighter. "Open the old remote diagnostics channel," I said, "and text me a temporary token. I'll look." "You'll be compensated," he blurted. "Whatever you need. Whatever you ask." I could almost see him turn to look for Renee, wherever she was in that building, and fail to meet her eyes. "Let's get it breathing," I said, then talk. 2 hours later, I stared at telemetry like a battlefield surgeon watching pulse and blood pressure ask each other for patience. Zane had done the technical equivalent of telling a thermostat it should trust its vibes. The cooling model had retrained itself into optimism and starved half the room, which heated the other half when failover shoved traffic at machines that should have been left alone. Power rails wobbled. UPS units did small, brave dances until they cried battery. A single block of writes hit a bad minute, corrupted indexes, and our defense system did what it was designed to do. Panic politely, lock all the doors, and wait for a human who understood humans to make a judgment call. My messages pinged with a line I never thought I'd see on my screen from Renee. Marcus, I was wrong. Please help us. Then another, hesitant, from Zane. Mr. Vale, I misjudged the interactions between new models and some older assumptions. I could use guidance. I sipped cold coffee, moved windows like chess pieces, and put together a plan that would be painful and survivable. Then I drove to the building I had promised myself I wouldn't set foot in again. News vans were parked like vultures with telescoping necks. Employees moved in nervous clusters. The security guard who always asked about Penny looked relieved enough to hug me and didn't. Renee waited by the elevators in yesterday's blouse and today's grief. She looked suddenly human, which is to say breakable. I'm sorry, she said, grabbing the words like a life preserver. This is my fault. It's ours, I said, because blame is satisfying and useless when the house is on fire. Let's put the match out. In the server room, the air had that fever smell metal gets when it's been running scared. I took Zane by the elbow, moved him under the whir of exhaust like a penitent under a waterfall, and handed him the binder he'd ignored. We're going to revert the thermal profiles to Rev 7B. You are going to stop improvising, I said. Nia, hit the manual bypass on D4. Lee, bring the secondary UPS cluster online in sequence, not all at once. If you power slam those in together, we trip the building. We worked for 4 hours in sentences that were verbs: roll back, verify, breathe, again. We restored from backups 3 days old, because that's how long the drift had gone unnoticed, and I could feel in the back of my throat the bitterness of knowing exactly which transactions would be lost and imagining the people behind them. A woman's mortgage payment would go through twice. A florist's deposit would vanish into the fog. We'd complicate their afternoons. The apology tour would be long. At 8 that night, Gideon found me kneeling in front of a stubborn blade like a mechanic with a wrench in his teeth. He looked 20 years older than in the glossy portrait in the lobby, the one where he posed next to the word innovate before the bolts. Marcus, he said, I should have stopped this. I wiped my hands on my jeans. You hired me to design a resilient organism. It still is. It didn't account for willful ignorance. What will it take, he said, and I could feel the boardroom behind him like a pressure front, to keep you. Not as a favor, as a future. I considered the heat and hum, the way quiet competence gets treated like wallpaper until the day people notice the room has walls. I pictured Renee outside trying to explain to a client why their logs looked like melted sugar. I pictured Zane's face, what arrogance looks like when it loses its last oxygen. 5-year contract, I said. Director of Core Architecture. I report to the board, not to your daughter. Absolute authority over deployments to mission-critical systems. Budget for a 5-person reliability team. Salaries I don't have to defend like a supplicant. And I tipped my head toward Zane, doesn't touch production for a long time. Maybe ever. Gideon didn't blink. Men accustomed to making decisions like chess moves don't telegraph surprise. Done, he said. We'll put it on paper in the morning. And Renee will be reassigned. Not marketing, I said. Give her something that lets her learn without costing people their livelihoods. Or send her back to school. But don't let her pretend a lesson didn't happen. He nodded like somebody had finally told him the truth he'd been avoiding. We got the room cool. We quieted the alarms. We reached, hand by careful hand, into the tangle of what had failed and untied it without making new knots. At 3:12 a.m., the core services finished syncing with integrity checks that made me want to cry from relief. I put my forehead against the rack for a second. It was like pressing your head to a friend's chest to hear a steady beat after a scare. On the way out, I passed Zane at a desk he no longer owned. He looked at me the way a man looks at a cliff he thought he could jump and now can't believe he tried. I thought models would save me, he said, voice low. Models are just aggressive mirrors, I said. They show you what you already think with math. He nodded slowly, the expensive confidence shaken loose. I'll be elsewhere. Take a job where being humbled is part of the description, I said. It'll hurt less next time. The next 3 weeks were an ugly kind of beautiful. My team, the reliability engineers I'd wanted for years and could finally hire, wrote code like surgeon's suture. We rebuilt indices, audited access, replaced the 6 servers that had taken the brunt of the heat with machines I spec'd like a meticulous parent. We printed a factual post-mortem and let it live in the light. Names removed, choices highlighted, consequences spelled out in black and white, so no future visionary could argue precedent. We implemented gates. We created a no Friday deployments policy that I joked we should have tattooed somewhere visible. Outside the glass, the world did what it does. Point, comment, move on. For a while we were the cautionary headline. Slick magazine think pieces about what happens when buzzwords meet buses. Regulators camped in conference rooms and left with fines that would sting but not kill. We lost 3 clients whose CFOs needed the theater of strength. We gained 2 who watched our recovery and decided competence impressed them more than swagger. Renee lasted 6 tense weeks in a strategic initiatives role before Gideon moved her into a department where success didn't involve buttons you could accidentally delete a decade with. She learned to build without a detonator nearby. You could see in meetings, when she dared to attend them, that the part of her that loved applause had been replaced by a part that did math on shame. In a different life, that could have made us allies. I returned to a corner office I put a plan in and promptly ignored. The real office was the same place it had always been, the room with the hum. I built a small team of people whose eyes went quiet when a graph looked wrong, whose pride lived in the word steady. We did brown bag talks on failure where the rule was no myth-making. We made learning institutional instead of accidental. 6 months later, a conference asked me to talk about crisis recovery. I almost said no. The work of keeping honest machines honest doesn't translate well to stages with light shows. But I remembered all the men in blazers declaring transformation like a sacrament, and I said yes if they promised the lights would be less theatrical than the subject. I called my talk When the Room Gets Hot, because it isn't the ones and zeros that ruin you. It's the heat of impatience. I told a room full of CTOs and engineers the story of a company that believed documentation could replace judgment. Write everything down, I said. Then train people until they know when to ignore what's written because the air feels different. A manual can tell you which button will do what. Experience is the part that whispers don't, not now. They laughed in the places that were safe to laugh, then wrote notes like the world was ending, which it always is in small, survivable ways. Inside Orion, the world didn't end. It changed. We became the kind of place where a young engineer could say, "This feels wrong," and a senior one would ask, "Tell me more," instead of, "Ship it." Gideon started walking the aisles again, older and more careful with gratitude. He stopped for my team once with pastries no one needed and said, "You saved us," and I corrected him. We taught ourselves to stop breaking ourselves on purpose. As for Zane, the industry treated him the way it treats men who learn their limits in public. It whispered his name behind closed doors and turned him into a parable on Slack channels. Last I heard, he'd carved out a job on a help desk in a small firm in Asheville, resolving printer drivers and learning to say, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" with humility. The job wasn't below him. The job was simply honest. 2 years rolled by, and I turned my 5-year contract into a comfort instead of a calculation. On my birthday, my daughter, now 22 and writing code that made my eyes sting with pride, sent me a message that said, "Teach me the part you don't write down." We spent a Saturday in the data center with ear protection and sticky notes, talking about how cooling is a mood, how power is a temperament, how logs tell you secrets if you stop asking them to flatter you. We ordered pizza at midnight, and when she fell asleep on my office couch with Penny's head on her ankles, I thought, here's the future I trust. When I retired at 55, it wasn't with a bang. It was with a speech I kept short and a cake that tasted like sugar and a long, grateful walk down one last aisle. Gideon said words about foundation and patience and the cost of forgetting where you stand. He looked at me in that room and looked at his daughter, who looked back, and you could see something mended if not beautiful, useful. I set up a small consultancy in my garage with a folding table and an ergonomic chair and the freedom to answer only to the work. I helped a Midwestern hospital stop chasing a new monitoring platform before it had learned to trust the one it had. I flew to a warehouse in Nevada and taught someone how to feel the air. I told executives no in ways their boards could hear. I mentored kids who said AI like a prayer and showed them where the God breaks down. One afternoon in late spring, an email slid into my inbox, subject line, an apology I owe. It was from Renee. She said she had learned things the expensive way. She said she had mistaken motion for progress and courage for meddling. She said she was sorry for what she took and what she broke and what she asked of me that day in the glass office when the eucalyptus smelled like a lie. I read it twice and didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of completion. Some threads don't need to be tied. They need to be cut cleanly so you don't keep tripping over them years later. On quiet mornings when the sun pushes through the blinds and makes lines on my desk, I think about revenge. People always expect revenge to burn. They want flames and ruin, contracts torn, a public undoing. Mine is cooler. It moves like careful air. It sounds like a server room at 2 a.m. After a hard night. The hum steady, the lights even, the graphs finding their old rhythm. It looks like a ledger where the costs are written honestly for once, not buried in optimism. The best revenge I know is to be right for the right reasons and to live long enough for the world to notice. It is building something so solid it survives someone else's lesson. It is refusing to make a show of your scars and instead hiring people who will never give themselves the same ones. Years after I left, I visited Orion as a guest, a gray-haired man in a conference badge that didn't belong to me anymore. The lobby wall still said innovate, but someone had added a smaller sign beneath it, iterate with care. I laughed. The joke wasn't good. It was true. That was enough. I took the elevator down to where the floors are cold and honest. I stood at the end of row C and listened. The air smelled like nothing at all. The machines breathed like a sleeping animal. My hands itched the way they do when I want to adjust a thing that isn't mine anymore. I put them in my pockets instead. On the way out, the security guard who loved Penny called across the lobby. "You doing okay, Mr. Vale?" "I am," I said and meant it. The room's the right temperature. On the drive home, I passed a billboard with a startup name and a promise that sounded like it had been written by a man who'd never broken a sweat in a server room. I didn't sigh. I didn't scoff. I turned on the radio and let a song I didn't know fill the car. Penny put her chin on my thigh at a stoplight. The world kept insisting on being complicated. I kept insisting on respect. If you came to this hoping for a plate flipped in a boardroom, I'm sorry. That's not the ending I got. Mine is this: a city that learned to ask the right people the right questions, a daughter who calls her father when her gut and her graph disagree, a room that hums in a key I'll hear in my head until I die. And somewhere in that city, maybe, a man named Zane apologizing to a stranger about an email outage with a humility that makes him better, not smaller. The fuse they lit burned out by itself. All that noise and heat with nowhere to go. The thing I built, patient, stubborn, forgiving, outlasted fashion. The lesson outlasted the people who tried not to learn it. That's my favorite kind of justice. It doesn't ruin anyone. It makes ruin harder next time. It teaches the air itself to say, not like that. Try again. Carefully.